the rancher who rescued 2 Apache sisters from death in the desert and gained 2 brides. The buzzards were already circling. Cole Hardin spotted them from half a mile out, 3 black shapes riding the heat column above the broken flats east of the Sonora Basin. He had been pushing cattle since before sunrise, and every muscle in his back ached like a rope pulled past its limit. He could have ridden on. The cattle needed water. The sun was already a white furnace pressing straight down, and every hour of delay meant one more cow with its tongue swelling in its mouth. He rode toward the buzzards anyway. Cole was 32 years old, broad through the chest and lean everywhere else, with hands that had been cracked and scarred since he was 17 working his father's failing ranch outside Tucson. He had bought the dry fork spread 5 years ago with every dollar he owned and 2 years of debt, and he ran it alone except for a half-deaf cook named Pepper and 2 seasonal hands who showed up when the work was heavy and disappeared when it was not. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He was also not a man who could ride past buzzards without knowing what was underneath them. What was underneath them stopped his horse cold. 2 women lay in the shadow of a cracked boulder, the only shade for 100 yards in any direction. Apache women, young, dressed in the traditional way, both of them so still that Cole's first thought was that he was already too late. He swung down from his horse and crossed the ground in long strides, dropping to one knee beside the nearest one. She was breathing, barely. Her lips were split and white with dried salt. The second woman, lying with her arms stretched toward the first, was the same. He uncapped his canteen and did it right, tilting only a small amount of water between the first woman's lips, waiting, tilting a little more. He had seen men die from drinking too fast after the desert had wrung them out. He was not going to let that happen here. He worked on one, then the other, back and forth, coaxing water into them in slow, careful measures while the sun pressed down and his horse stamped its impatience behind him. The first woman's eyes opened after 20 minutes. They were dark eyes, sharp even through the fog of heat sickness, and the moment they focused on Cole's face, her body went rigid with fear. She tried to push herself upright and her arms gave out like wet rope. "Easy," Cole said, low and flat. "You are safe." She did not understand English. Or if she did not believe it yet. She looked at the pistol on his hip and then at his face and then past him at his horse, calculating something, deciding something. "Your sister is alive," Cole said, because he had already figured that much. The way the second woman's arm was stretched toward the first, that was not coincidence. That was someone who had crawled her last few yards to be close to the person she loved most. "She needs water and shade. That is all I am offering." He held out the canteen and set it on the ground between them, then leaned back and gave her room. She watched him for a long moment. Then she reached for the canteen with a hand that shook badly, and she turned to her sister and began giving her water the same careful way Cole had done it. Small amounts, slow and deliberate. Cole stood and went to his horse and pulled out the blanket he kept rolled behind his saddle. He rigged a shade by wedging his rifle upright in a rock crack and draping the blanket over it, angling it to throw shadow across both women. It was rough work, but it cut the direct sun. The first woman watched him do all of this without speaking. Her name, he would learn later, was Nolly. Her sister was Dolly. They were the daughters of a headman from a small band that had been moving east toward the reservation when a flash flood 3 days prior had separated them from the group in the night. They had walked in the wrong direction for 2 days before the heat and thirst had dropped them where Cole found them. He did not learn any of this for several hours. First, he had to keep them alive. He used the rest of his water, all of it, between the 2 of them. He ate nothing himself and drank nothing, which was not a problem yet but would become one if he did not find water before sundown. He knew a seep spring 4 miles northeast, a thin trickle that came out of the rock face above a dry creek bed. He had watered cattle there in dry seasons. He had to get them there. Moving them was not simple. Dolly, the younger sister, could not stand on her own. Cole fashioned a drag from his blanket and 2 lengths of rope, and tied it off to his horse's saddle in a way that would let the horse pull, while he walked alongside and kept the makeshift litter from turning over on the rough ground. Nolly walked on her own slowly, stopping every 100 yards to rest, but walking. She never asked for help. She never accepted his arm when the ground turned rough. But twice, when Cole looked back to check on Dolly, he caught Nolly watching him with an expression that was not fear anymore, not exactly. He did not name what it was. He just walked. The sun was an hour from the horizon when they reached the Seep Spring. Cole let both women drink first, as much as they wanted this time, now that their bodies could take it. Then he drank, long and grateful, until the tightness behind his eyes eased. He built a small fire when the dark came down, because the desert night was cold in a way that seemed like cruelty after a day like that one. He gave them what food he had, hard biscuits and dried beef, and he sat across the fire from them and did not try to talk. Nolly spoke first. A single word Apache, her eyes on his face. He shook his head. "I do not know that word," she thought for a moment. Her English was broken but present, the way a person speaks a language they learned from the outside of a situation rather than from inside it. "Why," she said carefully, "you help." Cole looked at the fire. His cattle were still out there without water. He had lost most of a workday, his back still ached, and his canteen was empty, and he had a 4-mile ride home in the dark ahead of him. "Because you needed it," he said. She looked at him for a long time after that. Dolly had fallen asleep against the rock, wrapped in Cole's blanket, her breathing steady and deep now, the color coming back into her face. Nolly sat upright, watching the darkness outside the firelight the way a person watches it when they have spent their whole life knowing what lives in it. Cole watered his horse and cinched the saddle loose for the night. He was not leaving them out here. Not until they could walk on their own and knew where they were going. He settled against his saddle on the ground and pulled his hat over his face. "I am Cole Hardin," he said. "This is my land. You are welcome on it." The fire crackled. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called once and then went quiet. He was asleep in 5 minutes. When he woke before dawn, Nolly was still sitting upright on the other side of the fire, watching the darkness. She had kept it burning all night. Cole did not make a show of noticing that she had kept the fire. He just added wood and put the coffee pot on and went about the business of the morning the same way he went about every morning, with his head down and his hands moving. The desert came back to color slowly, the black sky bleeding to purple and then to a dusty pink over the eastern flats. And by the time the coffee was ready, Dolly was sitting up and looking around with the particular expression of someone trying to assemble where they were from. The pieces available. Cole poured 2 cups and set them near the women without making it a thing. Dolly looked at the cup, then at Nolly, then at Cole. Nolly said something short in Apache. Dolly picked up the cup. Cole drank his own coffee and looked out at the land. The Dry Fork spread ran from the spring here northeast about 6 miles to the main house, and south another 4 miles to the lower pasture, where the creek usually ran, but had not run in 3 weeks. The cattle were scattered somewhere between the two, and without knowing where his 2 seasonal hands had pushed them yesterday, he was going to have to spend most of the morning finding the herd before he could move them to water. "You know where your people went," he said to Nolly. Not a question. She nodded once. "How far?" She looked at the land. She was reading it the way he read a cattle trail, checking distances against landmarks he could not even see from here. 2 days, she said. "East." "Below the Red Ridge." He knew the Red Ridge. It was the long sandstone formation that ran parallel to the reservation boundary, 30 miles out. Dolly spoke, and Nolly translated in the stripped-down way of someone choosing each English word deliberately. "She asks if we walk now, will you stop us?" "No," Cole said. Nolly looked at him. "But you are not strong enough to walk 2 days yet," he said. "Either of you. If you go out into that desert today, the heat will have you again by noon." He set his cup down and stood. "Stay 1 more day, rest. I will find your people's trail for you and tell you the right direction before you go." Dolly asked something. Nolly's answer was longer this time. Dolly looked at Cole with a measuring kind of look, the way you look at a horse you are trying to decide about, and then she nodded. Cole saddled up and rode out to find his cattle. He found them in the south pasture, which meant his hands had pushed them the wrong direction, which meant he was going to lose another half day moving them north to the spring. He did the work with his jaw set and his mind steady, the way he did all hard and tedious work, cutting the herd in sections and moving them in groups small enough to manage alone. By midday, the first group was watering at the spring seep, and the 2 women were sitting in the shade of the rock overhang nearby, watching him work with the patient attention of people who have nothing else to do. He noticed that Dolly had braided her hair. He noticed that Nolly's eyes followed the cattle the way a person watches something they understand. He said nothing and kept working. It was Pepper who made things complicated. Cole's cook came out around 2 in the afternoon in the old buckboard, with the left wheel that always needed checking, bringing the supply load Cole had asked for 2 days ago. Pepper was 60 years old, half Yaqui on his mother's side, deaf in one ear from a mining accident, and he had opinions about everything. He pulled the buckboard to a stop and looked at the two women by the rock and looked at Cole and did not say anything, but his eyebrows performed a very long speech. "They needed help," Cole said. Pepper climbed down from the buckboard and began unloading without a word. It was Nolly who spoke to Pepper first, in Spanish, which Cole should have thought of earlier. Pepper's mother had spoken nothing else. The conversation between Pepper and Nolly lasted 10 minutes, and Cole understood about every fourth word. But the result of it was that Pepper nodded many times and looked at Cole with an expression that was a significant step past mere eyebrow commentary. "What?" Cole said. "She says their father is Delgado Kestrel," Pepper said. "The head man." Cole knew the name. Every rancher between here and the reservation knew the name. Delgado Kestrel had kept his people peaceful during 3 years when the territory had been burning, had negotiated boundaries that other headmen had refused to touch, had stopped 2 separate incidents from becoming something that could not be stopped. He was a man that the territorial governor had met with personally and spoken of with respect. His 2 daughters had been lost in the desert for 3 days. Cole looked at Nolly. She was watching him steadily. "You did not tell me who your father was," he said. "You did not ask," she said. Pepper made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Cole went back to moving cattle. That evening, Pepper made a proper meal from the supplies, beans and salt pork and cornbread, and the 4 of them sat at the outdoor table Cole had built from the trunk of a fallen juniper. It was not a comfortable meal exactly, but it was not uncomfortable either. Pepper and Nolly spoke Spanish throughout. Dolly watched Cole with those measuring eyes and occasionally said something to Nolly that made Nolly's mouth pull briefly in one direction. Cole ate and did not ask what they were saying. After the meal, he sat on the porch with his coffee and Nolly came and stood a few feet away, not quite on the porch, not quite off it. "You are alone here," she said. It was not a question. "Mostly. That is a very large piece of land for one man." "Yes." She looked out at the dark land, the stars coming hard and white above the western ridgeline. "My father will want to thank you," she said. "He does not need to." "He will want to," she repeated, and there was something in the way she said it the second time that was different from the first time, a weight added, a meaning he could not quite find the edges of. Cole drank his coffee and looked at the stars. In the morning, he rode out early and cut sign for 2 hours east of the spring before he found what he was looking for. The track of a large group moving east. The kind of track that a band of 30 or 40 people leaves even when they are trying to move quietly. He followed it for a mile to confirm the direction, then rode back. He drew the route in the dirt with a stick, landmarks and distances, and Nolly studied it with her arms folded and her head tilted and asked 2 questions and then nodded. "You can follow this," Cole said. "Yes." He had rigged 2 packs from spare canvas, water, and food enough for 2 days, one for each of them. He handed them over without ceremony. Dolly took hers and said something to Nolly. Nolly looked at Cole. "She says you are a strange man," Nolly said. "How so?" "She has never seen a white man give away his water and his food and his blanket and 2 days of his work and ask for nothing." Cole picked up his hat from the fence post and put it on. "Nothing strange about it," he said. Nolly looked at him for a moment with those dark and unreadable eyes, and then she said something he did not expect. "We will come back," she said, not as a threat, not as a promise of repayment, the way you say a thing you have already decided. Cole watched them walk east into the morning light until the land folded them away. He stood at the fence for a while after that, holding his coffee, looking at the empty distance. Pepper appeared at his elbow. "She means it," Pepper said. "I know," Cole said. He finished his coffee and went back to work. Cole did not expect them back in a week. He expected, if they came at all, that it would be the kind of visit that gets arranged through formal channels. A messenger first, a scheduled meeting, a handshake with Delgado Kestrel on neutral ground with witnesses on both sides. That was how things were done when a rancher and an Apache headman needed to exchange anything, even courtesy. What he did not expect was to ride in from the south pasture on a Thursday afternoon and find 3 horses tied at his fence and 4 people sitting on his porch. He recognized Nolly from a distance. He recognized Dolly beside her. The 2 men he did not know, both Apache, both carrying themselves the specific way that men carry themselves when they are accustomed to their word being the last word in any room. Cole rode in slow and easy, making his approach visible and unhurried. The older of the two men stood when Cole swung down from his horse. He was past 60, Cole judged, with a face that had been pressed by weather and decision into something spare and permanent. His eyes were the same dark shade as Nolly's, with that same quality of reading everything they landed on. This was Delgado Kestrel. Cole tied his horse and walked to the porch and extended his hand. The headman looked at it for one beat, then gripped it in a way that told Cole everything he needed to know about the kind of man he was dealing with. "Cole Hardin," Cole said. "I know who you are," Delgado said. His English was precise, the kind of precise that comes from having learned it for strategic reasons and having learned it completely. "I have asked about you." "All bad, I hope," Cole said. Something shifted in Delgado's expression. Not a smile exactly, but the landscape that smiles come from. "Sit," the headman said. Pepper appeared from inside and set a pot of coffee and cups on the porch rail without being asked. Because Pepper always knew when coffee was needed, and because he had clearly been watching through the window for the last 10 minutes. They sat, Cole and Delgado, and the younger man who turned out to be Delgado's nephew. A serious man named Jaron who translated the occasional Apache phrase that Delgado chose to speak in his own language for precision. Nolly and Dolly stayed slightly apart, not excluded but not centered, in the way of women in a formal meeting who are nonetheless the reason for it. Delgado said that his daughters' lives were not a small thing. Cole said that any man would have done the same. Delgado said quietly that this was not true, and the way he said it closed that particular line of discussion. They talked for an hour, careful and indirect the way all important conversations are indirect, circling the real subject before landing on it. Cole learned things. Delgado's band had been pushed east by drought and by the slow, grinding pressure of ranchers expanding their fences. The reservation land was poorer than the land they had come from. Game was thin. The winters were becoming a problem. Cole looked out at his south pasture, the long, empty miles of dry grass that he had not figured out yet how to use without more hands and more water. He said nothing about that yet. It was not the right time. What Delgado said at the end of the meeting was this: his daughters were not children. They were grown women, both unmarried, both of their own minds in a way he had stopped trying to moderate. He had raised them that way, he said, without apology. And it was their wish to return to this place, to learn this land, to be useful here in exchange for nothing except being allowed to stay. Cole absorbed this. "That is their wish," he said carefully. "And mine," Delgado said, and let the weight of that land for a moment. Cole looked at Nolly. She was watching the distance with her arms folded and her chin level, and she did not look at him, which told him she had already said everything she was going to say, and the rest was between him and her father. "My spread is not much," Cole said. "I have seen it," Delgado said. "It could be." Cole was quiet for a while. A hawk crossed the sky above the pasture, high and unhurried. "All right," Cole said. They shook hands again. Delgado and Jaron rode out before sundown, and Cole stood at the fence watching them go the same way he had stood watching Nolly and Dolly go a week before, holding his coffee, looking at the distance. Pepper was at his elbow again. "You know what he was really saying," Pepper said. "I know," Cole said. "Two of them," Pepper said. "I know, Pepper. Just saying." Cole went inside. The women moved into the small second structure behind the main house, which Cole had built 2 years ago intending it as a bunkhouse and had never properly furnished. They fixed that themselves within 3 days, and Cole did not ask where they found the things they used or how they did it. The result was a room that looked nothing like anything he would have done with it, with woven coverings on the walls and a smell of dried herbs, and it looked, he thought privately, more like a home than anything on the property, including the main house. They were not idle. That became clear on the second day. Nolly had grown up in a place where water was a strategy, not an assumption, and she walked Cole's land with the systematic attention of someone taking inventory. On the third morning, she told him, through a combination of direct English and gestures when the English ran short, that there was a second spring on the northeast quarter that he had not been using because it was choked with debris from a rockslide 2 seasons back. He had ridden that land 100 times and not seen it. She showed him. The spring was there, a strong one, buried under a collapsed shelf of limestone. 2 days of work with a pry bar and a shovel and shovels produced a flow that filled the rock basin in under an hour. Cole stood looking at it with water running over his boots. "How did you find this?" he said. "The grass," she said. She pointed at a strip of slightly greener growth running through the brown, almost invisible unless you knew what you were looking for. "Water always leaves a trail." Dolly, meanwhile, had attached herself to the cattle. This was not what Cole expected. He had figured Dolly for the quieter of the two, the one who would keep to the background and do things he did not notice. He was wrong. Dolly had an instinct for cattle that his seasonal hands, both of whom had grown up around livestock, simply did not have. She could read a herd the way Cole read weather, understanding what they were about to do before they did it, moving to the right position, letting the animal's own nature do most of the work. Within 2 weeks, Cole's herd was moving better than it had moved in 3 years. He told her so one evening. She translated it herself, which meant she understood more English than she let on. "Your cattle are easy," she said. "Compared to what?" She looked at him with a perfectly straight face. "Everything," Cole laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in a while, and it surprised him, the sound of it in the evening air. Dolly watched him laugh with that measuring expression, and then she smiled, small and brief, and went back inside. That night Cole sat on the porch for a long time after the lights in the bunkhouse went out. The land was silver and black under the late moon, the cattle dark shapes in the south pasture, the whole spread laid out under a sky so thick with stars it seemed crowded. He thought about the word Nolly had used the morning they left. "We will come back, not if you want us. Not maybe. We will." He thought about Delgado Kestrel's hand in his, and the word that had been underneath the whole conversation like a current under still water. Stayed underneath it, never named, but present in everything that was said around it. Cole was a practical man. He had always been a practical man. He knew what it was to need and not ask for it, and he knew what it was to be offered something without being sure if you deserved it. He was not sure he deserved this. He was not sure that mattered. He went to bed. In the morning, Nolly was already at the new spring with a length of pipe she had found somewhere, working on a way to route the water to the north pasture, and Cole stood at the edge of the work and watched her for a moment before he went to get his tools. He did not say anything. He just got to work beside her. That was enough for now. Cole's 2 seasonal hands, Russ and Pete, came back in the 4th week. They rode in on a Monday, the way they always did without notice, expecting to find the spread the same as they had left it. They found Cole at the fence line with Nolly, both of them deep in a conversation about the northwest pasture that involved a hand-drawn map in the dirt, and a disagreement Cole was clearly losing. Russ pulled his horse up and looked at the scene for a long moment. Pete said, "Huh." Cole straightened up and walked over to the fence. "You are 2 weeks late," he said. "We had a thing," Russ said, which was the same explanation he gave every year and which Cole had stopped questioning. "There is work in the north pasture," Cole said. "Nolly will show you what needs doing." Russ looked at Nolly. Nolly looked at Russ with an expression that gave him nothing to work with. "She will show us," Russ said. "She knows this land better than you do now," Cole said. "That will be obvious inside an hour." "I suggest you do not waste the hour." Pete, who was 23 and had less investment in his opinions than Russ did, swung down from his horse and introduced himself to Nolly with reasonable courtesy. Nolly looked at him for a moment, then gave him a short nod that was not unfriendly. Russ took slightly longer to come around, but he came around. By the end of the week, both hands were working under Nolly's direction without the particular stiffness that had marked the first few days. And Dolly had taught Pete 3 things about managing cattle in the heat that he had needed to know for years without knowing. He needed to know them. Cole observed all of this from a middle distance and said nothing. What was harder was the trip to Calvada. Calvada was the nearest town, 14 miles east, a small and sun-beaten place with a general store, a saloon, a livery, and a population that had opinions about everything within a 30-mile radius. Cole went once a month for supplies. He had always gone alone. In the 5th week, Nolly said she needed specific things from the store, a kind of oil, a particular weight of rope, and 2 tools that Pepper's supply runs had not included. She described them in detail. Cole offered to bring them back. Nolly said she would come and show him. Cole thought about the 14 miles and the town and the people in it, and he thought about what it would mean to ride in with Nolly beside him. And he looked at her face and understood that she had already done that same calculation, and had decided it was not her problem. She was right, that did not make it simple. They rode in on a Wednesday. Cole put his horse to a walking pace so Nolly would not have to push hers, and they rode the 14 miles mostly without talking, which was a kind of talking in itself, the comfortable kind that does not need words. Calvada registered their arrival the way small towns register everything, with a general attention that was not exactly staring and not exactly not staring. Cole tied the horses at the rail in front of the general store and went in without making a show of anything. The storekeeper, a thin man named Ord whose face had been permanently arranged into an expression of low-level concern, looked at Cole and then at Nolly and then at Cole again. "Morning, Hardin," Ord said. "Morning," Cole said. "We have a list." He handed over the paper. Ord looked at it, looked at Nolly, looked at the paper again, and began pulling things off shelves. Cole walked the store with Nolly, who moved through the packed and crowded space with a kind of unhurried attention, examining things with the same systematic interest she brought to examining his land. It was at the nail bins that the man appeared. Cole did not know him. He was somewhere between 40 and 50, thick in a way that suggested he thought of himself as imposing, wearing the clothes of a man who owned land and wanted it known. "Hardin," the man said. "I do not know you," Cole said. "Lou Prater. I run the double cross up near the county line." He was not looking at Cole, he was looking at Nolly. "She yours?" The word landed in the store the way a stone lands in still water, spreading out in every direction. Cole put down the hardware he was holding. "She is on my land under my protection," Cole said, keeping his voice flat and even. "And you are going to want to choose your next words more carefully than you chose that one." Prater looked at Cole then, measuring him the way men like Prater measure men, looking for what they can use. He found nothing useful in Cole's expression. "Just asking," Prater said after a moment. "You asked," Cole said. "Now we are done." Prater left the store. Cole picked his hardware back up. Ord at the counter had gone very still. Nolly had not moved from where she was standing, and her face had not changed, and that was somehow the most precise demonstration of what she was made of that Cole had seen yet, that she had stood in that moment without flinching and without looking to him for rescue. He paid for the supplies and they loaded them and rode out. They were 2 miles from town before Nolly spoke. "That will happen again," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "It does not trouble you. Other people's opinions of my decisions have never kept me up at night." She was quiet for a mile. The land ran out in every direction, big and indifferent and clean. "My father said you were a serious man," she said. "What did you think?" Another mile of quiet. "I think he was right," she said. Cole looked out at the horizon and said nothing. There was a moment later that he would think back on as the point where something shifted without being announced. It was nothing dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening, and Cole was at the workbench in the linta beside the barn, repairing a saddle that had needed repair for 3 months. Nolly came and sat on the stool near the wall, which she sometimes did now, not to talk, just to be in the same space. Dolly put her head in the door, said something in Apache, and Nolly answered, and Dolly disappeared again. Cole kept working on the saddle. "She wants to know," Nolly said, "when you are going to say the thing you have not said." Cole set down his tool. "What thing?" he said, careful. "She says it is obvious to everyone except you." Cole looked at the saddle. He looked at his hands. "Nothing is obvious to me until I am sure of it," he said. "Are you sure?" The linta was quiet. Outside, the horses moved in the corral, slow and easy. "I am getting there," Cole said. Nolly sat with that for a moment. "Dolly says that is good enough," she said. Cole picked up his tool and went back to work. That night he wrote a letter, not to Delgado Kestrel. He would speak to the headman in person when the time came and the words were right. The letter was to his own sister in Tucson, who was the only family he had left and who he had not written to in 4 months. He told her that things on the spread were changing. He told her the land was producing better than it had since he bought it. He told her he had company. He did not explain the rest of it. Some things needed to be said face to face. He folded the letter and addressed it and set it on the table for Pepper to take to town. Outside, the stars were the same impossible density they always were, and somewhere to the east, beyond the dark ridgeline, the land his 2 hands could not yet fully hold was waiting, patient as stone. Cole went to bed and slept without difficulty, which was its own kind of answer. The first frost came early that year, a thin hard white that killed what was left of the dry grass and left the mornings sharp as a freshly honed blade. Cole had been preparing for it. The new spring Nolly had found on the northeast quarter was now connected to a stone trough he and Russ had spent 3 weeks building, and the north herd had access to water without the daily drive that had been burning time all summer. The south pasture had been cross-fenced using a technique Dolly had described, and Jaron, Delgado's nephew, had helped them execute during a 3-day visit in September. The ranch was tighter than it had been in years, more efficient, the land used better than Cole had known to use it alone. He was sitting with that in a quiet way on the morning he rode east to speak to Delgado Kestrel. He went alone. He had thought about whether to bring anyone, had decided no, and had told Nolly he was going. She had looked at him for a moment and then said, in the particular way she had of stripping things to their minimum, "All right." She did not ask what he was going to say. She already knew. The ride to the encampment took most of a morning, following the route Nolly had drawn for him back in the late summer. Landmarks he had committed to memory the way you commit things to memory when you are going to need them later. The red ridge was already pale and cold-looking in the autumn light, and the camp was set into a natural windbreak at the base of it, a well-chosen site that would hold the heat against the rock face and deflect the northwest wind. There were people who saw him coming from a quarter-mile out. There always were. Delgado was waiting near the central fire. Cole dismounted, and they shook hands and sat, and Jaron was there to translate the parts that needed translating, which were fewer than the last time. They had both learned something about how to talk to each other in the months between. Cole had learned that Delgado said almost nothing he did not mean to say. Delgado had apparently learned whatever he had needed to learn from whatever he had been told about Cole. Cole said what he had come to say. He said it plainly, the same way he did everything, without ornament or strategy. He was asking for permission to court Nolly. He was asking also for Dolly if Dolly was willing. He understood, he said, that this was not how such things were done in either of their traditions exactly. He was not trying to navigate around that. He was naming it directly because he thought Delgado deserved a direct man rather than an indirect one. Delgado listened to all of this without expression. Then he looked at Cole for a long time. "My daughters," he said, "told me this conversation was coming." "I expect they did," Cole said. "Nolly said you were a man who took time to be sure." "Yes." "She said also that you are sure now." "Yes," Cole said. Delgado was quiet for a while. A log settled in the fire. Somewhere in the camp a child was running and laughing, and the sound of it traveled in the cold air with a particular clarity. "I spent 3 years," the headman said, "deciding whether this valley was a place my people could survive or a place that would finish us." He looked at the land, the red ridge, the cold blue sky. "The land is not the problem. The land is generous if you know how to ask it. The problem is the men on the land and whether they can live beside each other instead of driving each other out." He looked at Cole. "You are the kind of man that question depends on." Cole held that. "I try to be," he said. "My daughters have already made their choice," Delgado said. "They are not children. I said this before. I say it again. What I give you is my respect for the man they chose. That is not a small thing." "I know it is not," Cole said. They shook hands a third time, and this handshake was different from the two before it, heavier, a different kind of agreement. Cole rode home in the afternoon light with the frost already coming back into the air, and the first real understanding of what his life was going to look like from here pressing quietly against the inside of his chest. The wedding happened in the first week of December. It was not one ceremony but two, because one ceremony was not enough to hold what it needed to hold. The first was done by a traveling minister who came through Calvada every few months and who Cole had written to 6 weeks prior. The second was conducted by Delgado himself, at dawn in the Apache way, with Jaron translating the words so Cole would know what he was agreeing to. He knew what he was agreeing to. Pepper cooked for 3 days preparing for the gathering. Russ and Pete had ridden hard to be back from their respective winters in time. Delgado came with Jaron and 6 others from the band, and they sat on the south side of the gathering and watched everything with the careful attention of people storing information for later use. Lou Prater and men like him were not there. That was not an accident. Calvada's opinion, Cole had decided, was Calvada's to manage. Cole stood at the east end of the cleared yard between the house and the barn with the thin December sun on his face, and the frost still white on the grass, and Nolly on his left and Dolly on his right. And the minister read the words that made it legal, and Delgado spoke the words. That made it true, and afterward there was food and fire, and a long, loud evening that Pepper would talk about for years. Nolly stood beside Cole at the fire after the eating was done and the talking had spread out into smaller groups. She was looking at the land the way she always looked at it, as if she were reading it. "What do you see?" Cole said. She was quiet for a moment. "Room," she said. "There is room here." Cole looked at the dark land, the north pasture with its new trough, the south pasture with its new fencing, the northeast quarter with its recovered spring, all of it running out under the stars to the ridgelands. "Yes," he said, "there is." Dolly appeared at his other side and said something to Nolly in Apache. Nolly's mouth pulled to one side. She translated. "She says Pepper put too much salt in the beans." "He always does," Cole said. Dolly nodded with great seriousness, as if this had been confirmed. The fire crackled. The stars were everywhere. The land Cole had been working and worrying alone for 5 years held 3 people now inside its boundaries with room for more, and the thing he had carried alone, that particular silence, was different from what it had been. Not gone, changed, lighter. He stood between the 2 women who had walked out of the desert onto his land, and changed every calculation he had ever made about what this life was going to add up to. And he looked at the fire and let the evening do what evenings do, which is carry everything forward. In the morning there would be work. There was always work. The cattle needed moving before the hard freeze came down. The northwest fence had a section that had been worrying him since October. Pepper had a list of supplies 3 pages long, but that was morning. Tonight the fire burned and the stars crowded the sky, and the land ran out in every direction, patient and wide, and entirely capable of holding what was being asked of it. Cole Hardin had ridden toward buzzards on an August afternoon because he could not ride past them. That was all it had been at the start. Everything after was just the land being generous, the way it always is, to the men and women who know how to ask it right.